Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by BeaversEdge recruiting analyst Dylan Callaghan-Croley here for BeaversEdge.com. We're here to break down Oregon State's signing day. The early signing period is done. Oregon State is all wrapped up as of as of 1 o'clock recording this podcast. Signed 18 names. We're going to obviously dive into it from the jump. Want to go ahead and welcome Dylan into the podcast here. First time he's jumping on the Edge podcast. You all know him as our recruiting writer extraordinaire. Dylan, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing good. It's been, a crazy last few weeks here on the recruiting trail, on the boards. Everybody who's following along knows all the latest in Oregon State recruiting. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been long, but I'm glad that it's wrapping up now. And, there's still another little second half, you could say, here before February with the original signing day. So should be fun. A lot of transfer portal stuff should be happening for the Beavers. So it should be pretty fun over the next few weeks, but the last few weeks are pretty fun as well.
Yeah, no doubt, all the way across. It's definitely been an exciting time at Beaver's Edge as Oregon State obviously just wrapped up their bowl game. Get the 10th win with the win over Florida, finish the season 10-3, and then the whirlwind couple of days getting back. Jonathan Smith and his staff obviously putting the finishing touches on the 2023 class. Let's go ahead and run through those names now as we have them here. Again, if you want the complete breakdown in detail, Dylan and I have been working hard behind the scenes over at BeaversEdge.com. Got notebooks, the whole rundown for you, so you guys can check that out there. But starting with Aiden Childs at quarterback, arguably the gem of the class, the four-star commitment, the lone four-star in the class for Oregon State from Downey, California. Followed by a couple receivers. Tastion Reddix comes in from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. David Wells comes in from Lakewood, Washington. Zachary Card comes in from Pittsburgh, California. And then Montrell Hatton comes in from Carthage, Texas. Switching over to tight end Cooper Jensen from Snohomish, Washington, up there, keeping Oregon State's pipeline of tight ends here on the West Coast going. Couple offensive linemen as well. The Beavers land Jacob Anderson from Billings, Montana. Also, Xander Esty from Auburn, California. Then switching to the defensive side, we've got a couple defensive linemen. Kels Howard from Las Vegas, Nevada. We got a chance to meet up with him at the bowl game. A super awesome guy. Looking forward to getting a chance to meet him when he gets on campus as well. Thomas Collins coming over from Sweden. Abraham Johnson coming from Salt Lake City. Leonard Ahu coming from Hawaii at the linebacker spot. Also have Isaiah Chisholm coming in as well. And then wrapping up with a couple defensive backs, Harlem Howard. Also have, Harlem Howard coming in. Also have Jermod McCoy as well. Also want to mention Nico Taylor as well, the Hutchinson, Kansas native. And also Andre Jordan, fellow defensive back as well. 18 names. Dylan, did I get them all or did I miss someone? It's been a bit of a long day. I think I got everybody.
I think you got everybody too. It's been a long day for all of us. So if you missed them, I missed them too. But I think we got everybody covered there. I mean, it is a pretty strong class overall. I know it
Oh,
fell a
I
little
think
bit
I had to.
outside the top.
Sorry, I think I forgot to mention Zakiah Sias as well, defensive end from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. But I think with that, we have everybody. So
We
please continue.
we both missed them. We both missed them. It's been that type of day. A lot of names flying in and out, because obviously Oregon State is our primary concern here. But there is, hundreds of names out there that we just hear about every day, especially somebody in my shoes covering also Penn State and Minnesota. A lot of information out there, so it is hard
Yeah.
times to keep track of everybody. But this class for Oregon State is a pretty solid class overall. I know it slid outside the top 50 today, but I don't think that takes anything away from what Jonathan Smith and his coaching staff was really able to do in this recruiting cycle thus far. I mean, if you want to start with the big names, Aiden Childs, just what a find for them, and what a
Hmm.
good job by them of landing him and then keeping him committed. When he committed, he was a rather unknown quarterback, went through some injury struggles earlier in his high school career. And then this season, he just exploded on the scene, rose up recruiting boards across the industry. Put together a very strong senior season. Over 73% of his passes were completed. Uh, 38 touchdowns, just 5 interceptions in 15 games, over 3,000 yards. And that's not including what he can do on the ground. So just an incredible player, and I think somebody who could be a multi-year star for the Beavers down the road, and just a great athlete as well. So I mean that's the big one. That's one everybody's excited about. I think he has a bright future in Corvallis. We'll see when he makes his first impacts. Could it be in 2023, perhaps? We do know the Beavers are, very they're searching very hard in their transfer portal for a transfer quarterback here. So we'll see what happens there. But definitely a name to know in the quarterback battle going into next year, but also in 2024 and beyond. Also on the offense side of the ball, I think Montrell Haddon out of Carthage, Texas, just a very high productive wide receiver. Uh, as a junior, even he was highly productive, had 61 receptions for over 1,000 yards. I'm not sure I've seen a senior stat yet, but I saw some of his tape, and it's
Yeah.
everything you would imagine. But I think he's going to be a guy, even if he doesn't wow you in terms of physical skill set, he's going to be a guy I think who come in and be productive throughout his career on campus. I think he could be a guy who does make an impact next year because he is quite advanced on the technical side of things when it comes to being a wide receiver, very good route runner. Uh, Switching defensively, you mentioned Howard. I think he's really intriguing because at 6'4", 270, he's kind of a bit of a tweener. He has the athleticism and the burst to play defensive end, but at that size, you think perhaps a move to defensive tackle could be in store at the next level. But the skill set is there for him to, I think, succeed at either one. Great athlete, great burst, great hand work when fighting offensive linemen. And then you mentioned the JUCO Nico Taylor. I think that's going to be a big one for them. They brought him in
Yes.
as an outside linebacker, I believe, but at his size, at 6'5", 6'6", wherever he comes in at, I think he can play both as pretty much a hybrid edge rusher. He was highly productive in JUCO, and I think he's going to be pretty productive for the Beavers next year, and definitely somebody who's going to help that pass rush because they desperately needed an additional pass rusher in there. They did a great job again pressure on quarterbacks this year, but didn't get to the quarterback probably as much as they would have liked. So I think he's going to help in that aspect a lot.
Yeah, no, great points all the way around. Just to add a few more to it, were you a bit surprised that Saez ended up getting listed as a outside linebacker as opposed to a defensive lineman, Dylan? I noticed that when we were going through the Oregon State's kind of release of the different positions and
Yeah.
heights and weights and whatnot. Obviously checks in as a pretty good sized body. Do you think he could just be a big
Yeah.
edge rusher there?
Yeah, I think almost in a similar vein to Nico Taylor. I mean, at
There you go.
6'4", 223, that is a body that is kind of close to college ready at linebacker. He probably could add
Right.
another 10 or so pounds and be ready to go. Obviously, making the move from defensive end to linebacker, there's going to be some learning the new position. And I think he played some linebacker at St. Thomas Aquinas, but at the same time, uh, playing it part time and playing it full time are two widely different things. It's going to take a little bit to get up to speed on that, but I think he's a player who can translate well to that. And just with him, I think something that is sometimes overlooked in college football overall is just recruiting winners.
Hmm.
And this kid's a winner. He played for one of the best high schools in the entire country. Uh, Won multiple state championships, including just last week. These are a type of kids that maybe they don't have the most production. Maybe they're not the most physically, uh, you know, impressive player, but they bring a winning attitude. They know what it takes to win, and especially when you come from a program like that, and that's no disrespect to any of the programs that any of the other commitments went to. But St. Thomas Aquinas is probably ran closer to a college program than uh, almost, I would say, 99.9% of the other high school programs in the country. It is a elite program from top to bottom. I think that is just going to be a kind of a underrated and underlying detail of his, uh, you know, bringing him in and how it can impact the Beavers going forward.
You mentioned Montrell Hatton, flipping back to the offensive side of the ball. He's a guy you've obviously talked about that you've liked for a while. I'm curious, between the other three guys, they obviously signed David Wells, Zach Card, and Reddix as well. Do you kind of like how they took a few different kind of stabs at receivers, so to speak, and brought in
Yeah,
a few different kind of guys with different skill sets?
exactly. It is a diverse wide receiver room in terms of skill set, what they brought in. Haddon is your, fundamentally sound, and he's a great athlete as well. I think even if the athleticism for some reason doesn't translate to the college level, I still think he can be productive because his route running abilities and what his skill set
Yes.
is overall. Reddix is your, home run threat type guy, but at 6 foot, 175 pounds, that's pretty good size as well. I think the Beavers have him listed at 6'1". But he's another productive guy, but that big speed threat, home run threat, you can never have too much speed. Speed's the name of the game in today's college football. If you don't have
Right.
that speed, especially at the skill positions, it's going to be tough to win consistently. David Wells, I like more of a big bodied wide receiver, um, quality athlete, lettered in basketball as well, and was a track star. He also is pretty good returner, so I think he's going to be able to do quite a bit for them. Uh, Kind of similar to Reddix. I think Reddix though has a little bit more, perhaps upside slash athleticism, and then Zachary Card kind of in that mold as well, but also a quality route runner. But yeah, overall, I do like what the Beavers did at wide receiver. Took a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different body types here, and I think it's going to work out well for them.
Yeah, no doubt for sure. And then obviously we mentioned Aiden Childs. Just to put a point on him, we're obviously going to dive into him a lot in the days post signing day, kind of breaking it down. And we have some content already up already at BeaversEdge.com. But Jonathan Smith, just to kind of kick it off, he kind of said, obviously Charles will get a look to play early, depending, based on his coming in the position of need. He said the receivers are going to be guys they look at early, potentially the defensive lineman as well, and then maybe a DB or two as well. I want to mention the two offensive linemen, Jacob Anderson and Xander Esty. Just based on what we've seen from Oregon State in the past, they're usually taking on linemen and kind of home growing them, so to speak, for a year or two before we see them see action. So, of the guys on the list, I wouldn't necessarily expect to see those guys right away. But again, don't want to take anything away. I think the Beavers are very excited about what both of those guys bring to the table as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. I think there's really a handful of guys here that I wouldn't be shocked played early. You
Yeah.
mentioned some of them. I I think it's going to be a good mixture of guys who have that early impact. I'm not saying they're going to be stars off the bat, but can have see rather consistent playing time as a true freshman. I think there's some guys on here that are a little bit more on the development side that in 2, 3 years you could see a bigger impact from. But in today's college football game, the key to that is just kids being willing to be patient and not wanting
Right.
to enter the transfer portal the minute that they realize it's going to take a while for me to see the field. The roster management is almost as big as recruiting in today's college football world. So that's going to be just interesting to see how the coaching staff handles that going forward, because this cycle is even way different than last cycle. This is really the
Hmm.
first full, NIL cycle, the first full cycle that's really being impacted this heavily by the transfer portal. It's a whole new world out there. There's still going to be a lot of changes, and it's going to be intriguing to see how Oregon State handles that and the roster management aspect of some guys possibly not wanting to wait as long to see the field.
No doubt, good points, especially just like how the class itself, and we even talked to Jonathan Smith about that today. You can check it out in his press conference, just how the landscape of recruiting, it's ever evolving, it's ever changing, and he talked about that with his staff and credited his staff for being on it and staying as competitive as they can be within all of that. We mentioned already Zakiya Sayas, who's going to be one of the outside linebackers. Want to mention Leonard Ahieu as well. He obviously is going to be on a Mormon mission for a couple of years, so we'll circle back to him in a couple of recruiting cycles. But obviously, the Beavers won a big time recruiting battle over Hawaii. I remember back before the season started, Dylan, you and I were talking about him, and you felt pretty confident that the Warriors were going to be able to, hang on to him, and the Beavers kind of were able to build up some momentum and get him. So I think he's a strong take there. And then Isaiah Chisholm is a guy that I really like because the Beavers are graduating some experience at the inside linebacker position with Jack Coletto, Kyrie Fisher-Morris, Omar Spates, obviously undecided whether or not he's going to return. So, they've got some depth there and some guys at inside linebacker right now. But I think if there are departures, he could be a guy that sees the mix as well. I just overall, Dylan, I really like how they've divided the class as far as like a nice little breakdown of each position, like not too heavy on one side of the ball, not too heavy necessarily in one particular position group. There's nice balance. And, once we saw what positions we want them to, or the coaching staff rather, wants the players to ultimately play, it balances out quite nicely. And we'll obviously get to the defensive backs and defensive line after this.
No, absolutely. They did a great job in uh answering their needs, but also, like you said, putting together a well-balanced recruiting class. I mean, I think they hit pretty much every position in this cycle so far. And yes, there's still some needs out there, but absolutely, it's been well balanced. You mentioned Isaiah Chisholm, another guy I think is going to be an absolute steal for the Beavers.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about production. 166 tackles as a senior, 106
Mm.
solo tackles, 9 tackles for a loss, 3 sacks, and that's
Is
playing
that
in
good?
Southern California.
Is that good, Dylan?
I
is that
think I
is
think it's
that
pretty
good? Is
good,
that good?
but I mean, this kid's playing in Southern California. I know
Right.
every division and conference isn't built the same, but if you're playing football in Southern California, period, you're going up against some pretty good talent. He played a lot of good teams on that schedule. So it's not like he's going up and playing kids that are not in his, talent league. He's played a lot of good talent, and the fact that he was able to rack up those numbers is really impressive. And people probably are getting annoyed from me saying production a lot, but to me, production is one of the biggest things you should look for when looking at a recruit and trying to judge them. Because I mean, you can have all this talent in the world, but if you don't have the production, there is something wrong between the talent and what's happening on the field. There's a misfire, a misconnection somewhere.
Right.
Chisholm has all the talent. He has great. I mean, maybe a little undersized for a linebacker at 6'1", but still has good size. He's very athletic, and
Right.
the production's all there on the field. So I think this is going to be a fantastic pickup, and that's somebody I think could play as a true freshman. Maybe he's still redshirts, but I think we see him at least in 3 or 4 games next year.
Yeah, no, he's a guy that, I've kind of gotten down to what the Oregon State coaching staff wants from those inside linebackers just because of the scheme that they play. The inside linebackers, almost the captain of that middle part of the
Yep.
unit so far. And Trent Bray uses the term stopping power. He loves to have guys that literally, when an opposing player runs into them, they just stop. And I think that's kind of how you can see a little bit with some of the guys they've recruited in each of the last few cycles. I think back to a guy like Melvin Jordan last year, kind of super big frame, coming out of Florida. And it kind of reminds me of Chisholm a little bit this year as far as just having that really big frame and the ability just to kind of stop a running player whenever he kind of comes in his vicinity. And he's a guy, Dylan, that Coach Smith mentioned today. Said Trent Bray had to win a big time recruiting battle for, and a guy that they're really pleased with. And for all of you at Beaver's Edge that are listening and paying attention to the quality of player that Oregon State's been getting into the mix for recently, you're starting to see Oregon State enter into more big time recruiting battles and win more big time recruiting battles. And I think that's a benefit of the consistent staff that we've seen. I think it's a benefit of the success that we've seen. So all good things for Oregon State in that regard. Moving over to the defensive line, a couple guys also that Jonathan Smith said could be in the mix to play early, just based on what you mentioned a few minutes ago, Dylan, the need to generate an even better pass rush this next year. Thomas Collins obviously comes in from Sweden. Abraham Johnson, JoJo Johnson, as he's called, comes in from Salt Lake City. And then obviously Howard as well. It's going to be interesting to see once those guys all kind of, get on campus and whatnot. But like we've said, based on just needing to generate a little bit more of a pass rush, and that's kind of one of the few things with the defense that we didn't see firing on all cylinders all year long. Any of those guys could potentially get into the mix, and I think the headliner is definitely Howard. I think he's going to be an awesome addition to this program and the team. And, like I said earlier, getting a chance to meet him down in Las Vegas, just got an infectious personality, awesome guy to be around. And I think he's going to be an awesome teammate.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and I think the thing that stands out to me about this defensive line class, defensive tackles, especially, and really overall, is while the Beavers recruited to what they like in each position, they also seem to in this class, and I'm sure in every class, but this class I think they did an especially good job at it, is recruiting good to great, even elite athletes.
Yeah, I would
I
agree.
think you you can you can teach fundamentals any day of the week to a good football player, and all these guys are obviously really good football players. But the one thing you can't teach, or one of the things you can't teach, is athleticism to go along with speed and size. And all these guys throughout the class are very good athletes, and I think even if they aren't there in terms of their fundamentals or wherever they are position wise, they're guys where you can see the potential because of their athleticism. And a
Right,
lot of them aren't major projects. A lot of them are guys that may need a year or so and then can see the field. But it's not like we're talking about guys who are extremely raw and
right,
are going to take 3 years before they even see the field. I'm especially curious about what Collins is going to be. I'm glad they were able to figure out what he was. I know they probably saw him in a few camps, but on tape, it's hard to tell because there's just not much out there. He's not going up against,
right,
strong talent on a consistent basis. But the athleticism seems to be there. He has good size for a defensive tackle. So I'm very curious to see what he turns out to be. If he played at some point next year, I don't think I would be shocked because of the athleticism. But if you also took, 2 years to see the field,
right,
it wouldn't be surprising either because
right. He's a
there
bit of
is
a
going to be
wild
an
card.
adjustment period.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think he's
it is a
definitely a bit of
wild
a
card.
wild card. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And what are your thoughts kind of on JoJo Johnson? Do you think he could be maybe one of the most kind of like ready guys of the like?
Yeah,
I look at him and Howard as real close, being able to kind of maybe be ready right away just based on the size alone, you know?
yeah, I think size alone definitely ready, either right away or close to it. I mean, at
Right,
280 pounds, he probably could go out there and be fine. If I think if he adds 10, 15 more pounds, even better. Uh, on tape, he seems to be pretty physically ready. He has a nice burst. Some technical things will need to be fixed, but that's with any high school kid. And
right.
I think he could play next year. Uh, but I could also see them trying to hold on to that red shirt because I do think there's some potential there. It'll probably depend, on how depth chart plays out, how injuries play out throughout the year. But
For
I think
sure,
there's
for sure.
definitely upside there for him to be uh, in the rotation at defensive tackle as early as next season. Absolutely, alongside Howard.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, just guys that Jonathan Smith obviously kind of mentioned, and he even said yourself, it's not easy for a true freshman to play. And Dylan and I are mentioning, he could play, but we saw this last year was really mainly Damian Martinez and Jack Velling, and that got a lot of run as true freshmen. And we saw how special Damian Martinez obviously is, and then Jack Velling, for the most part, thrown into the action because of Luke Musgrave. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, and going back to that, it, traditionally, this many true freshmen wouldn't play. I mean, and it comes down to, the overall recruiting class, the level of talent we're talking about.
Right.
Um, but a lot of this also comes back down to that whole roster management aspect, because in today's college football world, coaches know they're going to have to try to play some guys earlier than they
That's
prob
a good point.
if it
That's a good
come
point.
if even if they thought that they were there physically, or close enough to where they'd be comfortable playing them, but maybe they didn't want to, trying to keep that red shirt. With the roster management issues these days in college football, that sometimes the coaches' hands are kind of forced, because would you rather play a guy that you really like, and maybe you don't get that extra year, or would you rather not play him and potentially lose him in the transfer
Right.
portal, uh, either during or after the season? So I think that's another thing to go along with the roster management stuff. But I also think it's just a good indication of where we think this Oregon State recruiting class is. No, it's not full of, elite athletes, elite talent, but it is full of very good athletes and very good talent. A lot of guys who maybe they won't be stars, but I think could be productive players for Oregon State for 2, 3, 4 years, and possibly beyond.
Right, and I think you've kind of seen we've written about it because that's a great point because we've seen the progression of Jonathan Smith's recruiting classes year by year and get better as we've written about in our ranking story, and as Dylan and I mentioned top of the podcast. Even if this year ends up not quite eclipsing last year's mark of 53rd, I think it's still worth noting that um, Oregon State was able to have great success this year off of, if you follow the tracks, so to speak, recruiting classes that maybe weren't ranked super high, right? So I think it's a
Yeah.
piece of it, but I think more importantly, coaches aren't maybe necessarily as concerned with stars as maybe we are. They're concerned with getting the right guys into their system who they think they can develop into being, those studs. I think that's been the case with Jonathan Smith so far, just based on the guys from the 18 class, 19 class, 20 class, setting them up for where they
Yeah.
are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we want to wrap this up here soon, so I'll go over three quick thoughts on that. Hopefully, I remember them all. And I don't know if I'll be able to do them in the order I wished, but my first overall thought is the stars. And absolutely, you're correct on that. Coaches are looking to recruit to fit their systems, and if they are a 4-star, 5-star talent, great. If not, oh well. But what I think we saw this year is Oregon State being able to go up against some uh, big name programs to land some of these kids. You look at some of these offer lists. It's not like they went up against, the Fresno States, the Wyomings,
Right,
the San Diego States of the world consistently. Yes, there are
right,
some guys they went up for those guys, but they also recruited against Nebraska. They recruited against Michigan, Oregon,
right.
Arizona. A lot of schools that are putting together really good recruiting classes this cycle. And as the program continues to have success, even if it's not to the level that it was this year, but they can show that they have proven they can sustain success year to year,
Hmm.
7, 8, 9 wins. Uh, the recruits are going to come, and I know that USC, UCLA leaving the Pac-12 opens up a whole can of worms for the Beavers that could have maybe negative consequences down the road in terms of conference. But at the same time, it's opening up a whole new window for everybody else in the Pac-12, including Oregon State. And I think the Beavers are made a statement this year, and I think they're going to be able to continue to build off this. Recruits are going to see that. And as the Beavers get their NIL game more and more in order, I don't think they'll ever be, amongst the top there, but they're going to, I think, be able to be, uh, they're going to have success there uh, as time goes on. I think the current classes are going to get better. It may be slow, but they're going to get better, and they're going to get some of these higher level talents in to the program. And then, yeah, the recruiting class may not eclipse last year's ranking, but I think the big thing here is they're not going to probably take many more high school guys. Maybe they take one or two, depending on who's out there. But they're going to hit the transfer portal hard here over the next few
Right.
months, and we as set on the board, they're going to go after some big names, including at quarterback. Our subscribers know two names out there already that they're
Yep.
going after. And those aren't going to be reflected in the rankings. I think Rivals is working on a transfer type ranking
Yeah.
down the road, maybe next year. But um, those are going to be reflected there. But when you look at what they bring in the 2023 recruiting cycle right now, and you add in what they're probably going to bring in through the transfer portal, I think you're looking at overall one of the better classes probably in the Pac-12 from top to bottom in terms of overall talent. Because it's not top heavy, but there's not many guys here that I'm or any really that I question perhaps if they
Right.
were a good take. I think all these guys have some serious potential, and we're all solid to great takes by the program. So there's a lot of programs out there at the Power Five level that they have a lot of 5-star talents, a lot of 4-star talents, but then there's some guys you think they possibly reached on. I'm not sure the Beavers really reached for anybody here. I think from top to bottom, it's a solid overall class, and I think the transfer portal is going to be a great complement to it.
Yeah, no doubt. Great points there across the board, Dylan. I couldn't have said it better myself, just as far as, how they're going to utilize the portal. And as you mentioned, if you want to get in on the action, the damn board has all the information about those two quarterbacks that Dylan mentioned. Real quick, Dylan, just to close it up, the last three players we just want to get mentioned: Andre Jordan, Harlem Howard, and Jermod McCoy, the trio of defensive backs. What do you like about the trio of those guys? And obviously, that puts the bow tie on this 2023 early signing class. And as Dylan said, maybe another high school guy here or there. But for the most part, I think we're going to see the Beavers attack the portal, pick their spots, and it'll be determined by some of the guys Jonathan Smith mentioned have decisions whether or not to return. Guys like Omar Spates, Katana Ladapo, Isaac Hodgins, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think I'll keep it short with the defensive backs overall. I think the
Yeah.
thing that stands out to me is they recruited uh, size and length here,
Yep.
which I think is two of the biggest things you need when you look at a defensive back. I mean, Jamard McCoy, 6'1", Harlem Howard, 6'1", Andre Jordan, 6'2", and they all have good length. You can That's two more things you can't teach. You can't, well, we
Right.
mentioned size, but you can't teach length. Um, we've seen what the Bealers have been able to do at developing cornerbacks and safeties over Jonathan Smith's tenure. I think these guys are all going to be able to come in and have productive careers as Beavers once they see the field. And overall, I like all three players and what they bring. All seem fundamentally sound, quality athletes, but that size and length cannot be stated enough.
No doubt. And again, with how well we saw Oregon State's defensive backs play this year, you obviously got some big names to replace, and Jaden Grant, Rajon Wright, and then potentially Katana Ladapo as well, depending on his decision as well. So lots to get into in the coming days. Dylan and I will obviously be back at it with numerous forms of content. If there's any big time breaking news, we'll obviously do an emergency pod of sorts. But Dylan, want to thank you for jumping on the pod, man. I want to thank everyone for tuning
Yeah.
in and listening. Make sure to stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com. It's the place to be for all Oregon State news. And Dylan and I are going to be keeping our ear to the ground as far as anything the Beavers are going to be doing in the transfer portal. It's definitely going to be a busy time, Dylan, but make sure to keep it locked to Beaver's Edge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Stay locked in with us over there. It's going to be, it may be a little slower here for the next week or so, but it is going to pick up right after the new year again. And from really right after the new year until February 8th, it is going to be a, full steam ahead train just running down the tracks into National Signing Day. And then we got to reset and do it all over again.
Yeah, no, it's going to be exciting times for sure. So make sure to keep it locked, BeaversEdge.com. Again, big thanks to Dylan for joining on this edition of the podcast. This is publisher Brenden Slaughter signing off. Stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com. We'll continue to have more coverage continuing from signing day throughout the week.